Since my early beginnings in 1999, I have heard hundreds of people tell me how much fun it would be and how they'd love to get in the art of glass blowing. Don't get me wrong, it's a ton of fun. But what they don't realize is that there's much more to it than just turning on a torch and making art. Whether it's cuts, burns, the emotional tolls, financial instability, not to mention the amount of time required just to learn basic concepts in glass art, being a glass blower just isn't for everybody. Hi, I'm Jason Michael, and today we're going to be discussing the top 5 reasons why you should not be a glass blower. Number 5, cuts. As we all know, glass, when broken, is quite sharp. Those times when you drop the glass, it shatters on impact, and no matter how well you sweep the floor, that last tiny shard is hiding in the shadows, just waiting to find its way into the bottom of your foot. When it comes to dealing with raw materials in the studio, there are many opportunities to cut yourself. One way is due to the fact that most glass companies do not polish the ends of the rods, leaving them sharp and dangerous. They're tightly bound in cardboard cases, and many times trying to remove a rod from the case, I've sliced my hands and fingertips open. The worst. Most of the rods come in 4 to 5 foot lengths and have to be broken down to manageable sizes, typically using a scoring knife. This tool adds a small scratch to the glass rod, creating a weak spot that allows you to snap it in half. This can be repeated over and over until you break the rod down into workable lengths that you need, but there's a catch. When scoring and snapping the rods, sometimes the ends will leave a sharp, pointy edge that can do a lot of damage. There is a right way and a wrong way to break down the rods, and doing it the wrong way can lead you to a quick trip to the emergency room. Number 4, burns. When it comes to injuries in the glass studio, burns are the most common injury. For starters, the flame produced by the torch runs around 3,500 to 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But more often than not, you're going to burn yourself with hot glass before sticking your hand in the flame. In the last 20 years, I've managed to burn myself in places from head to toe. I literally mean head to toe. I've had hot glass stick to my lips, various spots on my forearms, torsos, hands, feet. I had a hot piece bounce off the floor and stick in the area between the bottom of my foot and my flip-flop, literally welding my flip-flop to the bottom of my foot. Yes, I know, wearing flip-flops in a glass studio probably is not the smartest thing, but you know, sometimes I'm actually barefoot. I know, stupid, right? One common injury is picking up hot glass, but even just introducing a cold rod of glass to a raging hot flame causes a shock to the glass that can send shards of hot shrapnel flying all over the place, inevitably landing on your arm or hand, or better yet, your face. Protective eyewear is a must when working behind the torch, not only to save your eyes from having their cornea scorched, but it also helps protect them from small pieces of flying hot glass shrapnel. One of the first concepts I ingrained into my students' brains is that hot glass and cold glass look the same. This means you have to assume that everything on your bench is hot. Going back to cuts, a bad habit that I have, but also a safety mechanism I've set up for myself, is leaving one end of a glass rod unpolished. Do not do this. Because of the potential dangers that can rear their ugly heads in the studio, it is so important to create good habits. You have to be intentional with every action you make, and remember that hot glass and cold glass look the same. Number 3, the emotional toll. In the world of art, there are numerous mediums that an artist can use to create with, while being able to make adjustments, fix mistakes, and change the course of the direction initially intended on taking. When it comes to a glass as a medium, most of the time a plan of action is required. More often than not, just turning on the torch, grabbing some glass, and creating art just isn't possible for everyone. Don't get me wrong, I know some glass artists who can't draw a stick figure to save their life, but for whatever reason they have the ability to go from their brain directly to the glass and create something unique. Most of the time, a thought-out plan and a clear vision of how you're going to approach the subject is required. At first, being a new glass artist allows for more freedom when it comes to being creative. Lots of ideas come to mind, and the imagination can be allowed to just be free and create small, less technical items. However, the more time you spend behind the torch and begin to explore and fine-tune your skills, you will find that you want to push the boundaries of your techniques and creative abilities, and the only way to execute this is by devising a well thought out plan. In the last 20 years, I've found that not only do I have to create what I would consider to be a blueprint on paper, but then take said blueprint and create what I want to make into a clear glass sketch first. This allows me to figure out the approach and the process of what it is that I'm going to finally make, and then purge the idea from my brain into the final product of glass. But more often than not, in the very end, all I have left is a pile of rubble on my bench. This occurrence can be extremely self-defeating and heartbreaking. You have to understand and be clear that not everything you're going to make will survive the process of creation. If you're not breaking things, you're not pushing yourself, and this emotional toll has caused many glass artists to hang up all their stuff and just sell it. Because of this, I'm giving you a fair warning that if you're susceptible to giving up easily, then this medium is going to teach you a hard lesson in perseverance, or you'll find that this medium is just not for you. Number 2, financial investment. When it comes to setting up your home studio for the first time, the initial investment can be quite steep. Between building a bench, installing adequate ventilation, lighting, and then the actual glass equipment can be quite a daunting task. Depending on your financial situation, this can be done on a budget or in phases, but in the end, the overall cost is not cheap. The worst thing you can do is build a studio that is pieced together by a few used screws and an old box fan for ventilation. You'd be better off setting up on a card table in your backyard. Even worse is dropping thousands of dollars on a space that you're only just starting to begin to use. To do this right, it is recommended that you turn your investment into a safe, healthy, functioning studio space that will allow you to grow and add equipment over the years as you find your way through the maze of creation with glass. For starters, a bench and ventilation system can be created for $100 to $150 depending on the space you're setting up in. For my space, I used 2 pallets for the bench top, covered that in large 12 by 12 inch square tiles that were leftovers from a floor install, and installed an energy efficient high CFM floor fan that is mounted into a window. Next, you're going to need a torch, hoses, regulators, oxygen and propane tanks, and some other safety equipment. When getting started, you do not need to go out and spend a ton of money on the hottest, biggest torch available. You want to start small and work your way up. Consider spending $150 to $200 on a torch instead of $1,200 to $4,000 on a high-end model. Overall, you can expect an initial investment of around $500 to $1,000 to get started. And this can also include your small kiln, which you will eventually need. This topic and more about setting up your studio will be discussed in future episodes. Just remember that you have to crawl before you walk, and if you jump in head first and spend $5,000 on a studio setup, even if you had the money to do so, you might get discouraged early on and decide that this was a terrible mistake and end up selling all of it online for half of what you paid for it. So be smart about it and invest wisely. Number 1, time investment. Some experts say to master anything in life, it takes about 10,000 hours of invested, repetitive time to reach that milestone. In my opinion, when it comes to mastering glass techniques, it takes around 10,000 hours per technique. That being said, even after 20 years behind the torch, I still struggle just turning it on. Early on as a young glass artist, it's easy to jump around from technique to technique, but in the long run, if you want to be proficient at any techniques, it will require repetitive refinement. When my students are given a new task, they are required to make whatever the new item is 100 times. This repetition is the building blocks for muscle memory, which inevitably is the only way to truly develop fundamental techniques that will give you a strong foundation to stand upon and grow as a glass artist. I've seen it time and time again, dozens of artists that are nothing more than one-trick ponies. They'll see a video on YouTube and they'll just learn how to do that, instead of starting with the basic techniques required to make any progress with glass as a medium. Think back to when you learned how to ride a bike. First, you had training wheels, which taught you the basics of balance while pedaling and steering. The training wheels were there to keep you from falling while you developed the muscle memory for coordinating, pedaling, and steering at the same time. Then the training wheels came off, and you had to add balance into the equation, which becomes the most frustrating part as you kept falling off and crashing your bike. After hours of practice, you eventually stopped falling and were then able to incorporate speed into the equation. Years later, you're jumping off curbs, riding with no hands, and towing your friends around on your handlebars. Learning how to manipulate glass into something that you see in your head is no different. Learn the basics first. If you're the type of person that gives up easily and doesn't like growth, then using glass as a medium to create art just isn't for you. Glass is like riding a bike. In the end, I hope this video does not discourage you. My reasoning for starting this channel off with this specific episode is to give you a little insight into what the reality is of what it takes to make any progress when it comes to using glass as a medium. My long-term goal at this channel is to guide you through everything you will need to know to safely set up your studio, turn the torch on for the first time, and make that first blob of glass. We will be creating several series covering topics on safety and proper studio setup, where to buy the equipment and materials, and much more. Then, we will be creating several different series of introductory courses covering everything from basic sculpting techniques, blown glass fundamentals, and even functional art. I truly am honored to have a platform that is here to help anyone get started and learn some basic principles when it comes to glass blowing. If you'd like more content on these topics, check out my podcast, The Wise Guy Radio Show. It can be found on any podcast platform as well as in the playlist on this channel. Thank you so much for tuning in today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button, subscribe down below, click that notification icon so you know when to be getting the next episode uploaded. And if you'd like to support this show, you can join our community on Patreon. Links are all in the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a wise day.